If we could go to the next, to the agenda slide, please, McKenna. Great. So today we'll be running through kind of our standard thing. We usually recap our previous meetings, so we'll run through a quick recap of what we've done before, and then today's meeting will really be entirely focused on non-golf turf facilities. So those types of turf facilities that are not golf courses, including parks, HOAs, schools, those types of things. So we'll have a little bit of data, and we'll have kind of a very, very initial proposal that we'll be bringing to you to begin discussion on what this conservation program might look like for the fifth management plans. If we could go to the next slide, please. We'll go ahead and get into that recap. Thank you, McKenna. So previously we had spent a lot of the time in these meetings talking golf course data, conservation programs, that type of thing. And we had established some goals for these conservation programs, particularly for golf, that were a need for simplicity, that it be data-driven, that it be equitable, and kind of most critically in terms of our statutory requirements for ADWR is reductions in withdrawals of groundwater. So we are kind of carrying forward those goals from those golf course discussions to these non-golf turf discussions. We think that these are really reasonable types of goals to have for creating these conservation programs. So you'll see throughout today's presentation that we have kind of carried forward some of those goals into this non-golf side. We had previously proposed an allotment calculation for golf courses, and also discussed allotment additions and the effluent adjustment for all turf facilities. We will come back to those things. We really wanted to get some initial discussions started on this non-golf piece, and then we'll come back to those golf course and turf additions and effluent discussions at a future meeting. So with that, we'll go on to the next slide, and I will go ahead and hand it off to Amanda to share a little bit of the data that went into the development of these programs.
Thank you, Natalie. Good morning, everyone. My name is Amanda Long, and I am the Management Plans Program Coordinator at ADWR. Since it has been a while since we last met, I thought I'd review some of the criteria that we are working with for developing a turf conservation program for the fifth management. Please. So when developing and updating the conservation program, this is the statute that we're working under. Each plan for each AMA should include a continuing mandatory conservation program, and that it should be designed, as Natalie said, and you'll probably hear us say it 10 more times, to reduce withdrawals of groundwater. So keep that in mind. We have been working under these criteria, and about need information for the fifth management, and we kind of split this up into what the design of the conservation program needs to meet, and then the items that would ideally be met. So first, the program needs to reduce withdrawals of groundwater. It needs to be transparent, easy to understand by both the regulated community as well as staff. And it also needs to be something that's reasonable, balanced, and feasible for facilities to comply with. We also wanted to include application rates and that reflected science and realistic practices, as well as streamlining some of the program components. Next slide, please. So I'm going to give a brief overview of some of the data that we used on non-golf facilities, and then I'll also review the current conservation program. Next slide. So this table is an overview of the regulated turf facilities that's using 2018 data, which is the data that we use for our analysis. So they are divided by subcategories. So we have parks, schools, homeowner associations, and cemeteries that are over 10 acres. And then as well, I put golf courses on this slide as well. There are a couple of miscellaneous facilities, and they include horse tracks, research centers, airports, and a couple other businesses that didn't quite fall into the other subcategories. So you can see that a majority of the facilities do fall within the Phoenix AMA, and we have talked quite a bit about golf, and there are significant of golf facilities, but there also are quite a few that are not golf courses, so we are going to focus on those today. Next slide, please. So the current conservation program for non-golf facilities includes a maximum annual water allotment, and this is for facilities that it limits new facilities to less than 90 acres, and as well there are some exemptions, some additional exemptions for cemeteries. The program also includes allotment additions, adjustments for effluents, and flex accounts. As these additional components are something that isn't common with golf courses, we will, as Natalie said, leave that discussion for our next meeting and focus today on the allotment calculation. So the current conservation program, the maximum water allotment is calculated using 3 application rates that range slightly depending on which AMA you're in. One category is for turfed acres, and that is at a rate of 4.45 to 4.9 acre feet per acre. One is for low water use acres, and that's at a rate of 1.5. And then there is a rate for water surface areas, and that ranges from 5.5 to 6.2. And these application rates are multiplied and then summed together to create an allotment for each facility. Next slide, please. So I'll go ahead and stop there for questions. Okay, it looks like Jeff Lee would like to speak. If you can unmute Jeff, then you're welcome to speak.
Hi, this is Jeff Lee with the Town of Gilbert, Water Conservation. I'm just curious because I'm not involved in this part of the process, but how is the department notified of any of these new facilities when they're coming online? Is that from your municipal water providers? Is that from for areas that are served by private water companies? Is that up to the municipality to notify you? And yeah, I guess that's my question.
This is Natalie. Amanda, I'm not sure if you know the answer to that or if Nolan might be on the call and might be able to chime in on that. My understanding. Oh, is that Nolan I hear?
Hey, Natalie. Yeah, Nolan's here.
Hey, Nolan.
Hi, I'm Nolan, the industrial planner. So generally, yes, on the forms, the muni reports, they put on these new facilities when they do notice they're delivering to a facility that is greater than 10 acres. So that'll be on the report, and I kind of use that. Otherwise, there's also the method of just looking on the map and kind of looking for these different facilities that are over, using the county assessor's website, seeing who owns the property, and if it's greater than 10 acres, kind of getting that contact information and sending those notices. So.
Great. Thank you, Nolan. So it's a little bit of a mix between hearing it maybe from a municipal provider and kind of a manual process on our side.
Okay, so the next question is from Sandra, and she asks, how are turf areas assigned of value within the range? So I believe that range is dependent on AMA and the consumptive use of grass in each AMA. Correct me there if I'm incorrect, Natalie.
No, that's correct. So that range that Amanda had on the previous slide, where you saw a range for the application rates, that is exclusively dependent on the AMA that they're in. So, for example, I believe the Santa Cruz AMA is for the fourth management plans at 4.45 acre feet per acre per turf acre, and the Phoenix AMA for the fourth management plans are at 4.75 acre feet per turf acre.
All right, Alex Arbolito would like to speak. You can go ahead and unmute yourself, Alex.
McKenna, Alex, I'm not sure if you were speaking, but we weren't able to hear you. McKenna, could you maybe help Alex get unmuted?
Can you hear me now?
She's
Yes, we
unmuted.
can.
Yeah, I unmuted, but I think somehow got muted again. So anyway, I have a general question about the turf program. And so I'm not sure, I can't stay for the whole meeting today, but I wanted to raise the question. And if you would prefer the questionnaire or something else, let me know. But and I think I've talked to you, Natalie, about this, but I'd like to discuss whether it would be a good idea to develop a BMP program, a best management practices program for industrial users. We have that for agricultural users and municipal users, and I think that it would be a good idea to discuss that for the fifth management plan. So it's probably, looking at the agenda, maybe it's not something for today's meeting, but I am wondering if that's something the department would consider, perhaps putting on the next agenda, or your thoughts on that.
Sure, thanks, Alex. If we were to consider a BMP program for golf courses or other turf facilities, for example, we still would have this statutory requirement to reduce withdrawals of groundwater. So I think the only kind of tricky thing there might be that particular design in how we ensure that we're meeting that statutory requirement. I think we're certainly open to suggestions and that discussion. So maybe we can follow up either with you or in a future meeting about that.
Okay, that would be great. I just wanted to raise that, so maybe we could have some discussion at one of the meetings about it.
Thanks,
Thank
Alex.
you.
The next question is from Melinda, and she asks, do all the non-golf also have the individual user requirement?
Hey, this is Nolan again. I guess
Thank you, Nolan.
that. It just depends whether they're an individual user or not. So if they have their own rights and pump their own water, then no. If they are receiving from a provider, then yes. Only receiving, because a definition of an individual user is anyone who doesn't own their own rights and pump their own. They're getting water from a muni provider. So those folks are, by definition, individual users. So.
Thanks, Nolan.
The next question is from Adria. What happens when a community is brought on in phases and individual parcels may not have 10 acres, but the total community once built is over 10 acres?
Sure. Go ahead, Nolan. Sorry.
No, you're all right, Natalie. As of now, I basically can't I have to wait until the facility is actually built out and is over 10 acres. and I have the physical as-built for that built out, so there's not changes going on back and forth, or if they do build it out and they're not over 10 acres. So as of now, I have to wait until they are 10 acres built out to notify them.
I would also note here that it's not necessarily going to be a matter of 10 acres on like individual parcels necessarily. What we're looking at for that 10 acres, if you're thinking about like an HOA, is going to be the common areas, parks, that kind of thing. We're not looking at the turf that might be in somebody's front yard.
All right, I believe that is the question. Oh, there's one more that just popped in. From Melinda again, do you notify the water provider and the user?
Nolan, maybe you can jump again for this.
So yes, so generally how it goes is it'll either, one of the providers will contact me letting me know they have a new user that they're delivering to and they want to make them. But first off, the first note I'll send them is an as-built asking, yes, the facility. So I'll get the facility owners and whoever actually runs that facility, I'll get that contact information from either the provider or the county assessor website. And I'll send it directly to them because I have to let them know that I'm looking at them and I need the maps for that facility to calculate that conservation allotment. And then once I get that, they have 180 days to provide that. Once I get that from them, then I send them that conservation allotment notice, letting them know what that conservation requirements are and what they're kind of, in this case with the turf, they have conservation allotment caps. So with all that information to them, yeah. And the provider, yeah, the provider gets that stuff.
Yeah, that's where I was wondering is I wanted to find out about the provider. So as a private utility, we don't have the same access to some of that information that a municipal provider would have, right? So that's why I was wondering. Thank you.
Thank you, Nolan.
Yeah, and if anyone ever wants any of those inserts or anything like that or specific conservation requirements, you can email me and I can throw my email in the chat.
Thank you, Nolan. We have a question here from Heather. She asks, how is reporting on allotments and tracking of compliance done here? Is there some sort of flexibility account for compliance determination? What happens if a facility goes out of compliance?
So the flexibility accounts for non-golf turf facilities are actually exactly the same as they are for golf courses. So it's there's a plus or minus 20% of the allotment that can be either banked or debited in that flex account, and that is maintained on an annual basis. So a facility would only be determined to be out of compliance if they go less than negative 20% in that flex account. And in terms of if a facility goes out of compliance, we do that on kind of an individual basis. We would look at the kind of particularities of the city. We would work with the facility to attempt to bring them back into compliance. Maybe Nolan can speak a little more specifically to that. I do believe he's worked on some of those types of cases.
Yeah, for the most part, the ones I've been associated with, we generally work out some type of stip and consent order or kind of work with the facility first to try and find out why they're going over and what's going on and how they can prevent that from going on in the future. And then, yeah, stip and consent. So if they continue to misbehave, basically, then kind of come in with the fines and that type of thing. So, because generally any of this stuff is associated with, there are statutes for charging people for overuse. So
thanks, Nolan.
I have a question from Asia. She asks, can you provide a reference for provider requirements for notifications? And
maybe Nolan can help out with that one as well. Are you looking for like the type of information that would need to be provided there. I guess I'm not totally clear what you're asking for there. And Asia, we can always, if you're not able to unmute yourself, if you are able to unmute yourself, feel free to. If you're not able to, feel free to.
Hi, Natalie.
Oh, hi, there you are.
Yeah, sorry about that. It's Asia. I was looking for just a reference I thought might be helpful for the rule or statute, or that's what I was getting at.
Okay. That would
requirement.
more than likely be in the management plans. We can, I don't know that off the top of my head, but we can look that up for you.
All right, there are no more questions in the chat box, so we can go ahead and move on to the next slide. And I will pass that off to Maggie Martin.
Thank you, Amanda. My name is Maggie Martin. I am a management plan specialist, and today I'll be discussing potential program updates for non-golf facilities. We've had a few stakeholder suggestions for ways we might update the conservation program for non-golf facilities, and today we will talk about two of those potential ideas. Next slide, please. The first of the comments that we received are related to the size of the facilities that have conservation requirements. It has been suggested to us that there are facilities that are under the 10-acre mark who may be water intensive. So the suggestion here is to consider requiring facilities under 10 acres to have a conservation requirement, or to look at size by the entire landscape rather than just the water intensive landscaped areas. However, looking at facilities to include that are under 10 acres would be administratively difficult because adding those facilities would be a very manual process and thus very resource intensive. So although we think this idea does have merit, it would be difficult for ADWR to implement at this time. We do think that this is worth reconsidering in the future, and we are open to other ideas of how we might go about implementing this. Next slide, please. Another idea is what we are calling the use-dependent application rate. This would update the way that maximum annual allotment is calculated. As always, the allotment would be calculated, but how the water is applied in each facility is delegated however the facility sees fit. This calculation method would acknowledge that different turf-related facilities do not have one type of turf or need to have one type of turf across the entirety of their facility. The original method had just one type of turf, and the new potential methods that I will describe today have two types of turf, athletic and ornamental. Athletic would include sports fields and would have a higher application rate, whereas ornamental might include landscaping at commercial sites or common areas and HOAs and would have a lower application rate. These application rates are based on an analysis conducted by the town of Gilbert, which used a 77% distribution uniformity and varying crop coefficients to look at how different end uses of turf with different turf quality requirements might be translated into a water budget estimate. It's worth noting that we also welcome feedback on these two potential turf categories. Similar to the fourth management plan, there would also be an application rate for low water use acres and water surface area. The water surface acres application rate would remain the same as in the fourth management plan for the respective AMAs, and the low water use application rate would be updated. In updating the golf application rates, we had a presentation and recommendation from Dr. Paul Brown and of the University of Arizona. We would update this application rate to reflect Dr. Brown's suggestion of 0.74 acre feet per acre. We acknowledge that this method might add some complexity to the program, which is the opposite of one of our criteria when designing a conservation program, but this method is still simple enough to understand and reduces withdrawals of groundwater, while reflecting the actual end use of the water-intensive landscape. This is consistent with the previous management plan requirement that water-intensive landscape should only be planted in areas directly associated with the facility's primary purposes. We have looked at several options of how we might split the application rates across the different turf facilities, and the idea here is that each of the turf facilities would get a different default breakdown of the turf types. Using data from the non-golf turf-related facilities, we looked at several different scenarios, and we are going to show 2 of those potential scenarios and are looking for your feedback on what is reasonable and what might accurately reflect the facilities in the AMAs. Next slide, please. And before we get into it, the values shown will reflect data from the Phoenix AMA. We wanted to bring to you the structure of what this analysis would look like, and the customization part for each of the AMAs will come later. Because all of the AMAs are not the same, the application rate value would be adjusted, but the structure is something we want to carry forward to all of the AMAs. So ornamental will have a lower application rate and athletic a higher rate. So first here is the 50-50 breakdown across all of the facilities. This means that all facilities would have a default percent of 50% for both ornamental and athletic turf types. We have shown the results similar to how we represented the golf results, including the 2 criteria of reducing withdrawals of groundwater and being equitable. So no one facility type is impacted more than others. For option 1 here, we found that splitting up the facilities by 50% proportions of turf results in both of these criteria being met. Next slide, please. Our second option here was to break up the turf percentages according to this chart. So here, parks would have a default of 25% athletic and 75% ornamental. Schools would have 75% athletic and 25% ornamental. HOAs would have 0% athletic and 100% ornamental. Cemeteries were left the same at 50% athletic and 50% ornamental. And though we do not have data on the precise breakdowns of each facility, we do feel that these might be reasonable. Parks and HOAs have a lot of areas that are not used for athletic purposes, while the majority of school turf can be considered athletic. But again, we are looking for your feedback on what is reasonable and what would be an accurate breakdown. So for this option, we found that it does meet our criteria of reducing withdrawals of groundwater. In order to reach equitability, we would like to suggest another mechanism that might allow facilities to change their percentage of turf breakdown to more accurately reflect what is in their facility. And Natalie will now discuss some potential ideas that we have regarding what that process might look like. Next slide.
Thanks, Maggie. So we did kind of lay out these potential default percentages for each type of facility. We realize that individual facilities are not all the same. So where you saw in that last slide that there may be a little bit of an equity issue, we think that we can address this with some kind of an addition mechanism. So the idea here is that we would allow some kind of administrative mechanism where a facility could provide ADWR additional information that they have more athletic fields than are their default. And we would then look at that information and provide an adjustment to that breakdown for that particular facility and update their allotment accordingly. So I know that's kind of a lot of words to say something that's intended to be pretty simple, but essentially we're, with this method, thinking that we could have kind of these default percentages and also add some flexibility into the program by allowing those facilities who have a high percentage of athletic turf to get some kind of adjustment or allotment addition there. We would create some kind of a standard form, documentation, try to make that, make sure that there's not too much of an administrative burden there, both on the part of the facilities and on the part of ADWR in terms of processing those applications. We would also likely be looking, in terms of those requests on our side, we would likely be looking for some kind of improvements, kind of defining the boundaries of those athletic fields, for example, showing that those are more than just a decorative type of turf. So with that, I think we can move to the next slide and we will take any questions that you may have on this. I know we threw a whole lot of information at you just now. So we'll pause for a minute here. We would like to take any questions you may have about this allotment calculation, your thoughts on whether this kind of use-dependent application rate might be functional, whether the kind of percentage breakdowns we might have might be reasonable. And we'd be happy to go back to any previous slides if that would be helpful for people.
Thank you, Maggie. Natalie, we do have a question from Melinda. She asks, how would an HOA know whether they are using groundwater or surface water? What would prevent a provider from assigning surface water to non-golf facilities to ease the complicated nature of the program?
Sure. So there is a requirement on the ADWR side that if a facility is receiving water through a commingled line, the provider cannot just account for that water as not commingled. We've seen this in with requests from other entities in the past, and that's kind of a general principle that we have. If there is a dedicated line delivering some kind of surface water, Colorado River water, or effluent, or something like that, where it's not commingled, then obviously that's a different case, and you can account for that as kind of that exclusive source. But if it is a commingled line, then you have to account for it as a commingled type of water. So I don't know if I missed anything in your question there. Sorry, I lost track of the question.
The second part of the question is, what would prevent a provider from assigning surface water to a non-golf facility to ease the complicated nature of the program?
Got it. And I guess that was kind of answered in that first part where ADWR does have kind of standards and rules against doing exactly that type of thing. If it is physically commingled water, then you need to report it as such.
Thank you, Ned. I have a question. Why intensive landscaped includes more turfs? Regulations.
Amanda, you cut out for a second there. Would you mind just rereading that?
Jeff Lee asks, water intensive landscape includes turf such as high water use plant materials. Is that square footage included in the 10A calculations?
Sure, and that's definitely a fair question. I believe the way water intensive landscape defined in the management plans has to do with plants that are not on the low water use plant list. However, the previous management plans, plural, excuse me, only included line items in this allotment calculation for turf or water surface area. So the water surface area line item, we are not proposing changing at this time. But the turf line item, I guess that definition would remain the same. I am not actually totally clear. Maybe Nolan can help me with this. I think that the acreage we use is only related to turf, but I could, maybe Nolan can help correct me or confirm that. If he's still here.
Yeah, no, I believe you're correct in that statement.
Great, thank you. I also realized that we didn't actually introduce Nolan. I apologize for that. Nolan Power, who you've heard from already several times throughout this meeting, is our industrial planner in the AMAs. So thank you, Nolan, for being here today and for chiming in with the additional information.
No problem.
Thank you, Natalie and Nolan. We have a comment from Mark Daly. If you can unmute your Mark, you're welcome to speak.
Hey, good morning. My name is Mark Daly. I'm the Director of Water Management for DLC Resources. Thank you for the opportunity to provide feedback on the upcoming 5th Management Plan. Just to give you a little background on DLC Resources, DLC Resources specializes in providing landscape maintenance and water management on large master plan communities. Some of our clients include Verrado, Vistancia, Eastmark, Desert Mountain, and Anthem, just to name a few. All in total, I manage about 2 billion gallons on an annual basis. That covers roughly 4,000 acres of landscape area. In my review of the latest ADWR management plan, I believe there's a gap in how water is proposed to be allocated that would negatively affect large HOAs with specifically tree-lined parkways. We've consulted with arbor experts, and we have done internal research, and we provided a formal report to ADWR documenting our findings. As I mentioned, our concern is only with communities that have tree-lined parkways. The parkway, sometimes called a tree lawn, is a narrow strip of common area that lines the local roads of the neighborhood streets in front of the residential homes, usually between the sidewalk and curb. While there are many communities that fit within the ADWR allotment criteria that have over 10 acres of turf, those HOAs with parkway trees represent a unique subgroup of communities that we believe deserve different consideration from ADWR. The heart of the issue is that the tree crown diameter, which is used in the calculation to determine the water need of the tree, quickly surpasses and outgrows the narrow width of the parkway strip that ADWR uses to calculate the allotments. As young trees, this isn't an issue because the size of the small tree relative to the area of the parkway strip aligns with the allocation. However, as the tree grows and matures, it outgrows the static size of the parkway and does not receive any additional allocation despite the changed needs of a mature tree. Just to paint a picture, Verrado, located out in Buckeye, for example, has 80 linear miles of parkway strips that lines the neighborhood streets. All in total, the 80 miles of narrow parkway strips that line the streets of Verrado only encompasses 64 acres of common area, yet provide 257 acres of tree canopy coverage. Because the parkways are so narrow and the trees are spaced every 30 linear feet, the trees are planted at a density of almost 200 trees per acre. The report that I provided to ADWR goes into great detail on how we determine the water needs of the trees, which utilizes a scientific approach and then compares and contrasts that with the ADWR allotment. In summary, I found that the parkways of Verrado only account for 17% of the ADWR allotment. However, the parkways will actually require 88% of the total allotment to maintain the health of the mature trees, which only leaves 12% of the allotment for the rest of the community. In my submittal, I outlined 2 possible solutions for consideration. Solution number 1, exempt the parkway acreage and all associated parkway usage from the calculation. Or solution number 2, ADWR can grant carbon credits in the form of gallons for street trees. So I went into each solution more in detail in the submittal and understand that both solutions do have their challenges that need to be vetted. However, both solutions do provide an avenue for large HOAs to retain all their street trees, which do provide so many upside benefits to the community. And there's also likely other viable solutions too that other participants of this group could provide to adjust the situation. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. We did receive your report and comments. We have not yet had a chance to fully go through those, but I imagine we will be reaching out to you with any questions and to have some further conversation about that. Thanks.
Thanks, Natalie. I have a question from Sandra. She asks, why would a cemetery have athletic areas?
That's a fair question, and perhaps we should have clarified that a little bit earlier. So the idea of kind of indicating cemeteries as 50-50 ornamental versus athletic was obviously not necessarily because cemeteries actually have athletic fields, but rather the idea there is kind of considering the end use for cemeteries where there might be a need for slightly higher quality turf in those types of facilities. So the idea there is that we are largely keeping their turf application rates largely flat from what they saw in the fourth management plan. They would still see a reduction in their low water use plant application rates, but their turf application rates would be largely flat from the fourth management plan.
Thanks, Natalie. We have a question from Kathy. Parks should have greater athletic area for softball fields, soccer fields, etc.
Sure, and Kathy, I appreciate that comment. We're certainly open to that type of feedback, particularly if anyone has any kind of quantitative information on this. We really kind of took a shot at those percentages based on our experiences, based on what we've seen, based on just looking at several facilities. We do not currently have data at ADWR for this type of information. So if there's information out there, we would certainly appreciate support with that. Our rationale for leaving it at, or for initially proposing it at 25%, I believe it was 25% for athletic fields for parks, was that there are a number of large older parks that have a lot of ornamental turf that don't have the large percentage of athletic fields. While to your exact point, a lot of the newer parks, more recent parks, do have a larger percentage of athletic fields. So we wanted to kind of make sure we were finding some kind of balance between those older and the newer. And we also think that some of that difference can be addressed through the mechanism that I mentioned, where parks who have a higher percentage will be able to apply to ADWR to have that percentage increased.
Thank you, Natalie. A comment here from Adria. My concern is that we are making it more complicated for those who are already participating in the program and working with budgets. As we discussed in previous meetings, there is a need to bring more people into the program and get them working with a budget, even if it is a simple one. I completely understand the logistical headache of making that happen. However, I am concerned that this option won't be explored until after 2025.
Sure, and I certainly appreciate the concern, Adria, about additional complexity. I think you all who attend these meetings hear pretty regularly about kind of some of our resource limitations at ADWR. So we as well are certainly concerned about complexity of the program. We do, however, think that because this total allotment would be similar to previous allotments where the total allotment is assigned, yes, the calculation might be a little bit more complex, but the total allotment still gets assigned to a given facility. That facility is responsible for managing that allotment within their facility as they see fit. It's not to say that you have to apply a certain amount of water to your athletic fields and a certain amount of water to your ornamental turf. You are able to use the entirety of that water across the facility as you see fit. So in kind of on the administrative side, on our side, the calculation would be a little bit different, but we still would just be assigning a single allotment to each facility. So on the facility side, the only difference would be that if they had a higher percentage of athletic fields, they would then need to come to us and let us know, and we would recalculate that allotment. So I think it does add some complexity. I'm certainly not dismissing that concern, but I think it's a small additional step that allows for a little bit more recognition of the difference in those end uses and a little bit more recognition of those different realities and needs for those end uses.
Thank you, Natalie. A question from Jeff Lee. If plants are not on the AMA low water use plant list, if plants that are not on the AMA low water use plant list are not included in the acreage, what is to prevent the use of significant amounts of high water use plants in the landscapes?
It's a good question, Jeff, and I guess the prevention or incentive there is really that there's not going to be water allocated to those plants. Since there's not acreage for those plants, there's not a line item in the allocation in the allotment calculation for them. So if you're using high water use plants in your other landscaping, then you're not going to get an additional allotment for those plants. So your incentive there, in order to have enough water to water the landscape, the incentive there would be to use those low water use plants. And it looks like, Adria, you might have had a follow-up question on your previous question. You can feel free to unmute.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Thank you. No, I really appreciate this discussion, and I completely understand where the complexity is coming from, and that's something where when we work with budgets with in our area, we go through this same thing. We provide the different application rates. I guess my concern is if we're looking at truly trying to withdraw the use or stop the withdrawal of groundwater, is how much more can we squeeze out of the participants that we already have in the program? And that's where we brought up the idea of if we bring more people, because I'm very concerned that people who are at 7 acres, 8 acres, 9 acres are very much overusing. And so there's only so much we can continue to look at it with people who are already in the program. And I have a feeling that when I go back to those participants, they're going to say, but I'm already in a budget and I'm already trying really hard. What about those people who are next door who continue to overuse, but they're just not in the program? And I completely understand how difficult that would be to bring those people on, to drop it to 7 acres or 8 acres or whatever. I just want to bring up the concern of, I don't know how much more I can squeeze out of the ones who are already in the program.
Sure, totally understandable, and I definitely understand your concern there. I think Maggie, as a part of kind of going through that suggestion that we've heard, and we have heard that suggestion from several people. I think at this point, due to kind of the very manual process of bringing a lot of additional facilities in, ADWR just really is not able to spend the time on that kind of administrative work at this time. So we definitely think that there is value. I agree with you that we've heard a lot of concern from a wide variety of people about that exact issue. It's definitely something that we will want to look into in the future. It's just not necessarily something that's going to be feasible for us in time for the adoption of the 5th management plans.
Awesome. Thank you. I appreciate you explaining that. And I know you're tight on your end too. I'll chat with you offline. I have some ideas that I just have some ideas. So I'll chat with you offline.
Great. I appreciate that, Adria. We certainly are open to additional suggestions about how we might look at this. So I'd be glad to hear your ideas.
Thank you, Adria and Natalie. There are no additional questions in the chat box right now.
Sorry there, I'm just making some notes to myself. Well, we are very close to out of time here. That was a really excellent amount of feedback. I really do appreciate the engagement and the questions from everyone. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide here. And I do want to note, as we're kind of moving on from the kind of content section in this meeting, that as McKenna mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, we do have the questionnaire. I know we threw a lot of information at you, a lot of suggestions, and a lot of new concepts at you. We will be updating our 5MP concepts page. And we will, the questionnaire that McKenna mentioned at the beginning is available for, as you kind of think through these concepts, as you think through these ideas, you can provide additional feedback over the course of the next couple weeks using that questionnaire. So again, thank you for all the questions and feedback so far, and we're definitely looking forward to hearing more from all of you. It looks like we may have a couple questions coming in. Amanda, can you help me with that?
Sure. We have a question from Shayna. She says, would it be possible to create an area of turf or total water use for any turf facilities as a regulatory standard?
Maybe I'll have to follow up with you on that, Shayna, and we can explore a little bit what you mean by that. We are certainly open to, yes, you can absolutely be unmuted, Shayna. We're certainly open to other alternatives here. This was kind of our initial idea here. And so this is not, what we've proposed today, I want to be very clear, is not necessarily the end of the conversation. We want to continue having this conversation. If what we've proposed is not realistic, then we want to hear that, and we want to figure out how we can build a realistic program here. So Shayna, go.
Are you able to hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Sorry, I just wanted to clarify that question because I realized it was confusing when I wrote it. What I was referring to, though, was having an and/or statement for turf facilities, whether they have a certain area of turf, or can we also regulate them by the total amount of water used on any turf facilities? Thank you.
Okay, so total amount of water use. Maybe I'm still not quite following the question. So for the total area of turf or the total water use for the turf facility as a whole, no matter what the acreage is that what you're saying there?
That's correct. So what I'm referring to is there must be, with all the data that you have acquired, some sort of average for a 10-acre turf facility. What if we also had a threshold based off of use for any commercial turf facility?
Okay. And I think what I'm hearing from you is kind of similar to the total landscaped area type of suggestion that we've heard before. And ultimately, in order to do something like that, we would have to look at whether we were regulating any facility that was total landscape of 10 acres or more, where currently the only facilities that are regulated under this program are those that are 10 acres of water intensive landscape or more. So there still would kind of be that administrative burden on our side in kind of determining those details and identifying those facilities in order to implement something like that. If we were to do that just for those who had 10 acres or more of water intensive landscape, I could see that a little bit being maybe a little bit more feasible for the fifth management plans. So maybe that's something we'll have to explore a little bit more on our side.
Thank you for exploring that further.
Yeah, and sorry if that train of thought was a little bit circular as I worked through it in my own mind.
Thank you, Natalie, and thank you, Shana, for clarifying your question. Sorry that I misinterpreted it. We have a question from Jeff Lee. Will this group be reviewing the new landscape users, section 6.3.8?
It's a really good question. Thank you, Jeff, for pointing out that is a thing, that you are correct that is a thing. And at this point, we did not necessarily have any proposals or suggestions or feedback related to the new landscape users section. But we certainly are open to evaluating that and having some conversations about that section in the management plans.
Thank you, Natalie. And then one last comment from Kathy, and you are correct. It is 2021, not 2020. There's a typo on that slide there.
Yes, apologies for that. Thank you, Kathy. So I don't see any additional comments. Thank you. Sorry, I do see Jeff, who just says he'll review and submit any ideas. As I said at the beginning of the meeting, we have been working through a whole lot of information in this group. We do really appreciate all of the engagement that we've had so far. As I said in the beginning of the meeting, we do intend at our next meeting or meetings to come back to the discussion of the golf course allotment calculation proposal, and also to the discussions of allotment additions and the effluent adjustment. So stay tuned for all of that. We wanted to take a little bit more time to consider some of the feedback that we've gotten there and have some additional discussions as we continue developing those concepts. So we certainly will be coming back to those things, as well as to the discussion and proposal that you heard today. So we have some more work to do here, and that's great. Our next meeting is scheduled for 4th in 2021. Yes, thank you, Kathy. Thank you, Kathy. So we will continue having these conversations. Please reach out to us if you have any ideas and want to discuss things further. In the meantime, we're always happy to have those offline conversations if there's not something that we're totally clear on, or if there's some additional perspective that can be provided. So with that, we'll go ahead and move on to the next slide. We do have some upcoming meetings on the calendar. Our kind of most soon coming, I guess I'm saying that really poorly. Our next meeting is an agricultural subgroup. We haven't had an ag meeting in a while, so this one is going to be a little bit longer, a lot longer, and it should be a really interesting meeting. So that meeting is next week. That's on the 8th. And the following week, we also have a full management plans work group meeting. At that management plans work group meeting, we plan to talk a lot about what our next steps are for these groups as a whole. We'll provide updates for each of the subgroups, but we'll also talk about our plans for drafting the 5th management plans. So we do still intend to use the bulk of next year of 2021 to draft the management plans. So we're really hoping to wrap up a lot of these subgroup meetings around the first quarter of next year. So we'll talk a lot about our plans and for the 5th management plans, how we're going to be kind of adjusting things and changing things in response to a lot of the feedback that we've gotten, and what our timeline is for the drafting and adoption of the 5th management plans. So with that, I think we need to jump back to the chat box and see if we have any additional questions.
There is just from Heather, do we have a date scheduled yet for the industrial subgroup meeting as a whole so that we can open the conversation about those new landscape use?
Sure. Thank you, Heather. We don't currently have one on the calendar, but we will certainly look into that. We have had some discussions with some of the other industrial subsectors, so there might be some additional things that we would need to follow up on in that group as well. So I appreciate that. We will look into getting a date on the calendar for that, or perhaps we would maybe consider having that landscape users discussion under this group, kind of depending on exactly what that looks like as we dig into it. But we will certainly make sure that emails go out to everyone to confirm whatever that plan is. Okay.
There are no additional questions or comments in the chat box.
Great, thank you. Well, I think that is the last slide. Do we have the next one, McKenna? Oh, there we go. So as I said, thank you to everyone. We really appreciate all the questions and the feedback throughout this process. Please remember to fill out the questionnaire. I see that McKenna dropped the questionnaire link in the chat box again. So that will be available, and it was also available at the beginning of this presentation, which should be online later today. So thank you for everyone for your time. Feel free to reach out to me or to the group of us anytime. Our group email is managementplans@azwater.gov. We are always happy to have further conversations with people and to work to clarify some of these ideas and things we've discussed in these meetings. So thank you all for your time, and I hope you all stay safe and have a wonderful holiday season. Thanks.